I wanted to say Happy New Year to each and every one of you, but the last 24 hours have proven to be exceedingly challenging, and it is important that we speak to the country to be able to ensure that on the multiple fronts that we have been affected in the last 24 hours, that we keep everyone up to date and to let people know that things are under control with respect to the consequences that we are now currently facing. It is fair to say that what we saw happen last night in Venezuela is uncharted territory. It is also fair to say that what we saw happen in Barbados last night must also become a thing of the past, and to that extent the law enforcement officers have also met with me, so that I am here for dual reasons today and not just one, but any one of the two would have been sufficient to bring me to address the people of this nation. With respect to the first matter, with respect to Venezuela's and what is happening in Caracas and broader Venezuela, about just around 3 o'clock this morning, I was awoken, well, not even awoken because I really wasn't sleeping, and I saw that we were having difficulties, and from then was in contact with other colleague heads of government as well as the Secretary General of CARICOM, and we had an urgent heads meeting from which you would have seen a statement earlier today. That meeting took place just after 5 o'clock this morning, and at that stage we recognized it was too early a stage for us to make any defining comment. That is still the position, because as we speak, matters are unfolding every half hour to an hour. You are as aware of the statements being made by different players, from the President of the United States of America to the Secretary of State to others, just as we are. But where Barbados becomes affected is on a number of areas, and we would have said this previously, which is why we continue to assert that small states really can only survive in an international rules-based order. For us, we always said that conflict would have consequences, and many of you asked, what would those consequences be? What would they look like? Well, we're living them out today. With the actions taken in Venezuela, a number of disruptions took place, primarily with respect to our airspace, or planes coming from the US, I should say. There are 3 major areas in the region, Eastern and Southern Caribbean, and then one in Puerto Rico, 4 altogether in the Caribbean, that effectively manage the upper flight space. But as you would appreciate, Barbados is probably the biggest hub closest to Venezuela in terms of tourism, and therefore in terms of air flights and in terms of hotel accommodation and cruise accommodation, we would inevitably be affected.
Just a few questions from me quickly. I know you said it's still early days as it relates to a CARICOM position and statement. However, I am with hearing terms such as a reboot of the Monroe Doctrine coming back to play with this attack on Venezuela. What is Barbados' position on the actual event itself?
Let me be very clear, Colville. Venezuela is our friend. The United States of America is our friend. In fact, in both instances, we have family relations with both countries. By the same token, the Caribbean community has been the entity that we have chosen as a matter of first principles to align our foreign policy with. When the heads of government met this morning, all of the persons were not there because it was an emergency early meeting. We took a decision that we will wait for other information to become present. And when that happens, we will certainly act collectively, and I do not want in any way to prejudice the integrity of that consultative process with CARICOM. Having said that, I've been very clear that our principles are very, very clear, and that small states, and by small I don't only mean as small as Barbados, but much larger than Barbados, but still considered small. Small states can only survive in an international rules-based order, and that therefore anything that happens that runs contrary to that would be of grave concern to us as a people in Barbados, but equally as to the region. So without prejudice, I will await any further consultations on the specifics of this incident, but I just share with you the principles that mean a lot to us beyond the normal international law principles.
And a follow-up question, Madam PM. You mentioned that basically, no further escalation within Venezuela, the short-term impacts should likely pass quickly. What are the permutations as it relates to the potential long-term impacts on our tourism?
Colville, we simply don't know. For me to speculate and to conjecture anything now would be just simply that, conjecture. Can't do it. I ask you to allow the events of the next few days to play out. There are perspectives as to what has transpired in Venezuela that I suspect will continue to play out in the next few days. So I do not think that we are in a position to offer any meaningful commentary at this stage. What I can say is that we are dealing with the consequences of the conflict. And the consequences of the conflict have been exceedingly disruptive to both of our ports of entry, the Grantley Adams International Airport and the Bridgetown Port. And to that extent, there are human realities because those disruptions have meant that people have been affected, and not only wealthy people visit our nation, so that there are some people who will not be able to take care of themselves in the circumstances. We're trying to get to the bottom of it. And between the rooms that remain from the BHTA, as well as contingency plans that we have for other facilities, not just for today, but as you correctly said, should something happen again. President Trump did say that there may well be a second strike. We don't know. By the same token, we are hoping and praying that there will be a de-escalation of any such conflict, because, as I've said over and over, escalation and war, of conflict and war, does not serve anyone's interests. And Barbados has always held the position that where there can be dialogue, where there can be conversation, let us have it, and let us see where we can find a common place. The truth is that that is why the UN system also exists, and I fully anticipate that they too will have to have a ventilation of these issues. But at the same time, irrespective of wherever you started in this argument, and the perspective as to who was right and who was wrong and who is not right, let us end up today at 4 o'clock saying we pray for no further escalation. In fact, we pray for de-escalation and we pray for dialogue. Persons will feel justified in a show of force. Persons will feel justified that they are acting in accordance with their law. Others will argue that it is a complete breach of international law. Whatever it is, as of 4 o'clock this afternoon, we are saying, let us continue to call and pray for de-escalation and for the absence of conflict, because we are now facing firsthand how conflict can affect not just lives, but livelihoods in the southern and eastern Caribbean. And Barbados, to that extent, while we are not the closest to Venezuela, Guyana and Trinidad and Tobago are. Grenada and St. Vincent and Barbados are the next line of countries after Guyana and Trinidad and Tobago. But among those 5, Barbados probably has the biggest logistics hub for tourism. So you now begin to understand why I speak and why I have been speaking in the terms that I have, without necessarily getting in to matters that are too high for us.
Several countries calling for the UN Emergency Council to intervene. Yeah, Security Council to intervene. Do you support those calls, Prime Minister?
I've always said that where mature conversation can take place, it should take place. I am conscious that the United States has a view that they feel strongly about with respect to the impact on their citizens of the narco-trafficking war. As to whether this is the way to deal with it or not is capable of debate, for sure. At the same time, there are those who believe that this is, in fact, a blatant breach of the articles of the UN Charter. And to that extent, the one place that we should be having conversations, even if we accept the events of last night, our eyes are in the front of our head, not the back of our head. And therefore, the time for mature conversation is this evening and tomorrow. Quite frankly, I would have expected that the Security Council should have been meeting already to be able to ensure that there are at least guardrails put in place, even as we speak now, to ensure that there is no potential for this precedent to be abused in the future by other countries.
Final question, Prime Minister. In case there is any mass exodus of Venezuelans out of the country, what kind of diplomatic support Barbados is prepared to give in that regard, basically?
I'm not going to speculate on anything in public, and I just want to give you the assurance. You know this government, and you know this leadership, and you know that we will do the right things for the right reasons. What I'm not going to do is to speculate and to give news stories for the sake of it or to fill copy, because we are at a peculiarly dangerous moment in the world's affairs. You know, in 2018, when I first addressed the United Nations, I said then that this world looks too much like it did 100 years ago. Regrettably, I have come to rue the day that I made that comment. And we have gone from crisis to crisis to crisis, from pandemic to cost of living crisis to supply disruption crises to the question of the geopolitical disruptions that we're seeing now, to the whole issue of, as I said, the continuing climate crisis. I mean, in the last 7 years, we had what? A freak storm, a ashfall, and one hurricane, Elsa, one storm surge that decimated the fishing industry, and then another freak storm that took a life here a few weeks ago. I do not know of any other similar time in my 60 years in this country where we have lurched from crisis to crisis to crisis to crisis. And that is why I say that sometimes if I am a little intolerant of those who want to play off the silly season as the place in which the playground should be, forgive me for not joining you on that playground, because I am now too consumed, and this government is too consumed with matters that even with every single ounce of energy, every single Barbadian, every single political party, we still do not have enough to fight through this. And I am now having to see how best we can perfect the art of walking in between the raindrops. So a little bit of trust is needed now, and a little bit of patience is needed, and that is where the maturity to leadership comes in, because rest assured, just as this morning at 3 o'clock I was up, just at 5 o'clock we dealt with the heads of government meeting, just as the National Security Council has met here for the last few hours, I'm conscious that there are things that we do not know and that we cannot predict at this point in time. But suffice it to say that we will be guided by first principles. We will be guided first by the protection of lives and livelihoods. We will be guided by the first principles that support Barbados's right and other small states' rights to be able to be protected in an international rules-based order. By the same token, we are not naive, and we understand that where large powers contend, large powers very often will want to show testicular fortitude, and that testicular fortitude may have negative impact and implications for small countries such as ours.